Delighted to be joined by Alysha Adams, people and culture leader with over 10 years experience. Hi.
Hi Aseel, so good to be here with you today.
Amazing, I'm so glad you're here as well. Tell us a bit about yourself.
So I'm going to start my story in a slightly unconventional place and start off by saying I actually left school at 12, and that was also the age that I founded my first business. And so I taught myself my GCSEs, did my A-levels early and entered the workforce. So in my teens, I was actually running a business that had customers globally and was navigating quite different things than my peers. But actually what all of that taught me was to not just work and how to hustle, but also how to learn and adapt, how to spot gaps and make them opportunities, and also how to do things even when you're afraid. And I would definitely say that I use all of those skills in my work today. So today I'm a people and culture leader in a fast-moving fintech environment, but I've spent the last 10 years in commercial, charity and startup environments, leading on everything exciting from L&D and leadership development to culture and engagement to DEIB and workplace. So had a huge variety of really exciting different roles, but also I think now really thinking about AI, of course. You know, how do we embed AI in our workplaces? How do we create AI native organisations? I'm also thinking about that in my role on 2 different boards that I sit on, as well as having recently finished creating a documentary about rewilding in the UK. Because, listen,
she never stops.
I'm really interested in looking at systems, whether ecological or organisational, and how they regenerate and adapt to change. And I think that's something that I'm, always thinking about in all different spaces. And I think underpinned all by, throughout my work is this real fascination with people, how they work, what makes them thrive, and also organisational strategy and success, and how do we make those 2 things come together in a closer and more aligned way. And that's really what I'm thinking about at the moment now, is actually how do we design workplaces not just for performances, but to be able to be resilient during change.
Fantastic, what a phenomenal introduction. And I absolutely am here for your kind of evolution as a human being, as an individual, and your career trajectory as well. Absolutely love the rewilding work you're doing. I'm deeply passionate about rewilding and the environment. So this is absolutely, and it is all linked. It is, our kind of responsibility is not just ending in the workplace. What are we here to talk about today? What do we want to unpack?
I think we're really here to talk about something that we've been discussing, something I've been discussing with lots of other people, which is how do we design organisations for change, whether that be AI and technology. How do we design resilient organisations that don't just cope through change, but thrive? And how can we make them successful? And where does people fit into that picture?
I mean, a very topical and important conversation. I think a lot of organisations are potentially scratching their heads a little bit about where to start. So what advice would you give people for kind of starting their strategic journey?
I would say 2 things. I would say one is about thinking holistically rather than thinking at an individual level. And that's actually a shift that I think people already knew we needed to make. I think that's something that's happening partly because of the trajectory after COVID and the change that created within organisations. But I also think that we need to be thinking differently about how organisational design looks and how people fit into that picture. So we need to be thinking less about the work that people do as in tasks and jobs, and more about the skill sets that we need for the future and how AI augmentation fits into that picture.
Yeah, so kind of like completely turning it on its head from a kind of traditionally you sit in this little box and you look after these 3 things. And you're completely correct, future-proofing your organisation, you have to move to more of a focus on skills rather than roles. So I know you've got tons of experience in OD and L&D. So I'm guessing that you're drawing on your deep experience there to kind of set you up, from a kind of holistic point of view. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes into this systems thinking piece where you're not just, that's one of the reasons why I love leading simultaneously in so many areas, is because I'm not just thinking about workplace from a facilities perspective, but from an experience perspective. How does that align with that people journey that we're trying to create and the culture we're trying to create? I would say that when we're thinking about the future, we're looking at for people who are learners who are able to adapt. We're actually saying we need managers who look different than potentially we've had historically. We don't just need technical leaders, we need people leaders who are able to support people through change, who are able to create this safe space where instability can be happening around you, chaos can be happening in the global context as well as in your organisational context, but they still feel safe and secure enough that they're able to perform at their best. And I think that we need to be thinking more about the realities of neuroscience and positive psychology to inform our people practices. So actually, we need managers who create a space where that is not the case for their individuals and they're still able to really deliver some exceptional, exciting, strategic work for the future.
Traditionally, you're great at your job, so you're really strong technically. Your career trajectory then inevitably leads you into a leadership role. So you're the best technical expert, then you're thrown into a leadership role. So this is where mistakes happen. Yes, you know the detail around the technical aspects of the role, but does that make you a good leader? And actually, the second part of that question is, do we need strong technical minds in our leadership team, or have we evolved past that?
Yes, we need strong technical minds in our leadership teams, but we need them to not just be people leaders. That's where the challenge, that's where that friction comes in. How can we expect people to progress when the only progression routes that we've provided are to manage people? And if that's not within your skill set, it's not within your wheelhouse, it's not even your passion. I'm passionate about leading teams. I love supporting my team to grow, be challenged, to expand. But if that's not one of your passions, honestly, maybe you shouldn't be in that space. But it's up to organisations to create different pathways. So they should be part of leadership teams because they provide a skill set of expertise to advise, to support, to help people think differently or think deeper into that subject matter expertise. But we don't need them to be people leaders. In a world of AI augmentation, whatever that might look like, so many hypotheses about what is to come. I don't think we're in a place where we can say with definite what it will or won't be. But what it will be is a space where tech has a stronger role in how we do our jobs and it will support us to do them better, hopefully. And I think with that, therefore, the skill sets that we need are for managers and leaders to be able to create psychological safety with their teams. They need to be have incredible strategic foresight. So Eleanor Winter speaks really well on this subject, and she basically says we need to think about strategic foresight, not just about looking to the future and seeing this linear path, which is what we've done historically, but about seeing all of the divergences that could come alongside that. Actually, we've seen that when it comes to things like COVID, when it comes to things like AI. When we're thinking about the future of AI, it's not just going to be generative. We've got lots of different kinds that are going to be coming out and are going to be more and more impactful. So it's not just saying, here's the path and we follow the path and we assume everything will stay the same, but what happens if we look outwards? And strategic leaders need to be able to look at that and think, okay, with foresight, here's how I'm going to make an informed decision. There's more and more data because of AI, but actually you need to be able to cut through that noise and make the right decisions at the right times and act with not just with speed, but with the ability to follow through and take people on that journey.
What about leaders who might say, well, data's one thing, but I follow my intuition. I have, a strong feeling. I feel that we need to do this. I feel we need to go in that direction. Do you feel that there's still room and space for feelings and intuition from that kind of human level?
I would say that if we imagine that the world is going to become more augmented with technology, that human element becomes more and more important. But what we need to do is not just accept emotion as fact, we need to analyse it as part of our data set. So we need to say, why am I feeling this way? Is this based on historical experiences? That might be really useful data. That might be saying, actually, we made a decision like this before and we realised it wasn't the right one because we weren't listening to these factors. It might be purely emotional because you're feeling pressured, you're feeling insecure about your future. Those are things that will elicit emotions in us as individuals. I think the key part isn't to say, don't listen to your feelings. The key part is to say, ask yourself why you're feeling that way and consider it as part of your data set and say, with that in mind, how does this influence my decision making? So purely emotional decision making, I would say let's put that on the back burner. But actually using that insight to help make more strategic decisions, absolutely. And also when we talk about gut feelings, You know, it really depends where that comes from. Again, if it's triggered by emotion, maybe that's not so helpful. But if it's a gut feeling because you're picking up on signals that you can't quite articulate right now, then maybe that is useful data, or at least should be considered as part of the piece.
Let's look at a traditional board. So, you know, your board level, you earn that seat at the table, you've got tenure, you've got experience, you know, you've got all these kind of traditional things that we prize in traditional organisations. Perhaps your board meets once a quarter or once a month. So things that need board level sign off inevitably end up having to wait. And then you've got your kind of long tenure, kind of really senior people who are capable of making those decisions. So tell me about this kind of traditional board structure and why it may no longer serve organisations who are moving at pace.
Organisations need to reimagine everything. It's almost like we need to take everything off the shelf, and you know, lots of things get put on the shelf and say, we don't touch that. I think that we need to take everything off and put it on the table and say, okay, how does this really work? Because when we're thinking about the future of change, we may not know what that change looks like, but we know it's coming. We know organisations need to be fast, adaptable, resilient. We know that actually this space is going to become more and more competitive. I've actually described it as like a land grab. There's this huge opportunity that's coming through. It's actually going to be the organisations that make those decisions fast, that take those risks, and that actually get there first ahead of their competition, that are going to be leading the way. With that in mind, this traditional board structure probably doesn't serve organisations that want to be here in 20 years' time. As a result, I think that we need to be thinking creatively, and it will look different for different organisations, for different industries, because they all are at very different levels of competitiveness, a different level of risk-taking, and you know, tech is obviously really out there. We've got very traditional industries like potentially law and you know, things like health and safety. Anything that's kind of in that space is going to be much more reserved in that. But actually, with our boards, I think we just need greater diversity of thinking. We need greater diversity of experience and backgrounds, because we need people who are coming in and interjecting and not just drawing on historic experience, but bringing fresh ideas and new insight and ways of doing things. Only 3% of board members in the UK are under 30. And I think that, you know, you can say that makes sense if you look at the traditional model of you are at least an exec member by the time you've become a board member. But actually, we need a huge amount more of different experiences, perspectives on our boards, and we need them to be structured differently every quarter. How are you making decisions that are fast moving if you're meeting and making decisions every quarter? Does that mean that new ideas that came 2 days after your last board are waiting 3 months for sign off? And then you've got implementation. You know, you could be 6 to 12 months behind your competitors just because you're following that traditional structure. Is there space for us to be thinking about micro boards, like a network of interconnected boards that have smaller groups of specialists who have permission to make strategic decisions that are brought to them by the business, so that they can happen at a much greater pace? So I think all of those things need to be happening. We need to be thinking about how our boards are structured, how they're meeting, how we're making decisions in that environment, and taking ego out of it as well, and thinking about the collective. And we really need to be thinking about making sure our boards are diverse in lots of different ways, so that actually that's going to be your competitive edge compared to other people.
Yeah, agree fully. I mean, this is like arguably quite disruptive stuff, isn't it? This is kind of like, you know, revolutionizing potentially how organizations work. You know, for individuals out there who are listening to this and it's really resonating with them, and they're thinking, wow, you know, our board, you know, are not an instrument for change, but they can be a hindrance. That, you know, our organisation is overly bureaucratic. How would someone, say a senior HR professional, how would they start dismantling the traditional norms within their organisation?
I think you first need to take the problem to the table and say, we know change is coming, whatever that looks like. How can we as an organisation be the most competitive in our space? And what are the things that will be barriers to that competitiveness? And taking it as that kind of question and having that conversation and saying, well, are there ways that we can make this? You don't need to do everything in a revolutionary way to at least be an evolving piece. You know, I think that the purpose is to challenge the existing norms, but find the piece that will get you a yes. You know, find the part that there is overlap, that everyone agrees on. Maybe it's this idea of micro boards that are the existing board members who have permission for people to come to them in between actual board meetings to make some of those strategic decisions, and that's part of your model. You know, that's actually not hugely revolutionary. It's just a slightly different mode of what you're currently doing. It's definitely going to be about sort of working with organisations to help make your boards more diverse. Even if you weren't facing a future of AI disruption, you should be thinking about your board diversity, because it is shown to be competitive. And regardless of your, you know, the political landscape when you're talking about DEIB, the reality is that the data backs diversity. It backs different perspectives. It says it makes you more competitive. So I kind of put aside personal feelings or politics and just say, we want to be the most competitive. This is what we've got to do to be there.
We've talked about some fascinating stuff here. I mean, I think you're clearly an instrument for change. You clearly know your stuff. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I feel like we could talk all day. Unfortunately, you know, we have a finite amount of time and you've got things to do. But it's been such a pleasure talking to you today. And I just thank you so much for sharing your insights with our network.
So lovely to speak to you too, Aseel.